Hello and welcome to Bridge Talks to COP26. I am Jonas Klevhag from The Bridge, and I will casually guide us through this digital lunch conversation today. COP is actually short for Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. So it's the COP to the UNFCCC. Thank God for abbreviations, I would say. It is an annual forum, but it's also the only forum on the climate crisis in which the opinions and concerns of the poorest countries carry equal weight to that of the biggest economies, such as US and China. I want to start by welcoming our special guest and friend, long-serving climate copper, Mattias Goldmann, former Chief Sustainability Officer at Sweco, and CEO of think tank Forest, but now in the capacity of independent climate expert at Goldmann Green. Welcome, Mattias. You're finally here with us, are you?
That's right. So good to be with you. I am in Thailand in the rainforest. It's the oldest forest in the world. I thought it would make sense since we're going to be discussing forests. So I'm excited about this COP coming up and excited about the pre-COPs that we're hosting.
Fantastic, and we're struggling right now with seeing you actually in the rainforest, so that we can have proof of that. But just a quick remark: what's the most obvious way in Thailand to confirm there's a global climate crisis going on, Mattias?
Well, I think around the world we realize that it's not about future generations or polar bears or anything such. It's about us here and now. And in Thailand, that is manifest not least in terms of floodings. In fact, even in Swedish newspapers, I've noticed that the floodings of Thailand has been taken up. And it's not as bad now as it was a few years ago. And that's because we are starting to adapt to a changing climate. We need to keep both those two perspectives in mind in Thailand and around the globe, that we need to reduce emissions and unfortunately also adapt to fires, floodings like here in Thailand, and to droughts and storms that are all happening with the changing climate.
Okay, well, back to the format here with COP26 postponed from 2020 to this year. The urgency was further emphasized by the latest report by IPCC in August, and we were concerned with this discrepancy between urgency on one hand and lagging climate action on the other hand. So to not let this year's COP26 in Glasgow pass unnoticed, we're producing this series of Bridge Talks as a build-up towards the 2 weeks in Glasgow, and with a humble ambition to get you to regard COP26 in a similar way to how you would have regarded a major sports event like the World Cup or the Olympics, perhaps. That's a quite humble ambition, I think. Today we have the forest industry in focus. Mattias, what does forestry have to do with COP26, would you say, in a nutshell?
Everything, Jonas. It's in fact a great start for the series to focus on forests, because the climate negotiations and the Paris Agreement are focused around adaptation, adapting to a changing climate, mitigation, reducing the climate impact, and also the global funding of climate work. And when we are mitigating emissions, the two big things that are doing that in nature has been the oceans and the forests. And the ocean are capable of doing that less and less when they warm up. So we need to do more in terms of forests. And that's why we need to stop deforestation, including the fires in the forest, and have more of afforestation. That is also a great way to adapt to a changing climate, because trees give forests, they give shadow, they give a microclimate, they reduce temperature. They're also great for biodiversity, which means that we can also focus on the many other sustainable development goals that are also urgently pressing. And finally, when we want to do more in terms of international climate financing, and we want to help more the really poor countries and also the destitute people around the world, focusing on trees is much better than many of the technologies like electric cars or others that might be top of mind when it comes to reducing emissions. Because much as we speak of how we can, for instance, have carbon capture and storage with modern technology, a tree is in fact a million years old way of carbon capture and storage. So it's right up there when it comes to solving the climate crisis.
Right. So all three aspects, mitigation, adaptation, and climate finance, are the reasons why forestry is such a central key to the Paris Agreement. Thank you, Mattias. And luckily, our hosting partner for this bridge talk to COP26 is Swedish Forest Industries, here today represented by their Director General, Viveka Beckeman. Beckeman, are you on air and can join us? Yes, you are. Welcome to the show today. Just why is it important for the Swedish forest industries to raise awareness about the climate issues and about COP26?
I think you summarized it quite well when you started off. This is a cooperation between the parties. This is solving the climate challenge is not something you do on your own. And for me, like Mattias said, the forest and the forest industry is sort of the natural. We have so much to contribute, but we can't do it on our own. So we really need everybody else's efforts. So for us, it's central that we have a discussion, that we find common solutions, because there is such potential in the forest. But we need all the other parties.
So great potential, but also a complex system that needs everyone on board to move things forward in a sustainable and impactful way.
Definitely.
Good. Well, since we're trying to do this conversation as sort of a digital lunch conversation over the lunch hour, I'm just curious, what would you have been eating? Or maybe you are eating something right now. What would you have been eating if we had this conversation in real life?
Well, the sad thing is that since we're doing this digitally, I had leftover pasta just a few minutes before we started. And if we had met in real life, I would definitely be having something more interesting. It's always a balance when you have a lunch meeting, because you can't have something that's too difficult to shoot, but on the other hand, you need to make sure that you don't get an energy dip. So perhaps sushi?
Very good. Well, I think leftovers is a good way to actually connect to the climate issues and food waste. So that would have been a good start as well, obviously. But sushi definitely does the trick as well. Not very nice to have you with us, and you will be shortly sharing your reflections on the main question. But first, I would like to introduce our other three distinguished guests today. If I can get everyone in the picture, we have Andréa Haag, Director Sustainability and Network at OKQ at 8. Welcome. What would you have had for lunch today if you were to eat with us?
I would probably have had something similar to what I had today. A quick sandwich on the run, trying to come to the conference in time, I guess. So not very much variation there. I'm sorry.
The time-efficient food is something, finger food basically, or street food. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And we also have from Ola Hansen, Senior Advisor, Energy and Climate, WWF Sweden. What will you be eating today?
I think I saved my lunch for later, so I think after this webinar I will have some leftovers from yesterday. We cooked some, I don't know, what's one of these boxes you get, a vegetarian red curry with oatmeal rice, a new product actually that's supposed to be is actually more climate friendly than regular rice, and it was quite good. So I look forward to these reheated leftovers.
Excellent. Let's hope you don't faint from malnutrition during.
No, I have some coffee here beside me, so I'm fine.
Warm welcome. And last, certainly not least, Ervast Öberg. You're the head of business and product development at Folkhem. What is your preferred lunch on a day like this?
I also have my Friday lunch waiting for me after this conference, but I'm a clear lunch salad kind of person that keeps me on close. Yeah. Salads and greens. So yes.
We're all quite green, quite leftoverish, and tuned in to the build-up of the events towards COP26. I would say a warm welcome to you all. And since you, Mattias, are actually 6 hours ahead of us. Oh, now with a picture and now with proof that you're actually in the rainforest. Great. So you are joining us from Thailand and 6 hours ahead. So that would mean that you're actually looking forward to a supper. What would that be today? Now you're muted, actually, Mattias.
This is a rainforest, but it's also a great lake, which means that I'm looking forward to hopefully fish. I'm a pescatarian or something like that. And I just realized that for lunch, I actually had 3. We were eating bamboo shots and bamboo, whether that's a tree or not, well, let's discuss that later, but it's almost a tree. And I just behind me here, the elephants are chewing away at the bamboo, and I had just a tiny piece for lunch.
Wow. Great to see you anyway. And so just to frame the question today, the idea, in general, we know that we're behind schedule to reach the goals in the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
We know we need to speed up. We need to increase our efforts. Would you say that this is mainly an exhausting message or an inspiring one?
But I'd say that it's both. I'd say that since it's called COP26, that means that we've done this 26 years in a row, where there was one gap year, and we have not fulfilled the promises that we've given ourselves as society. There's a double gap. First of all, what we promised to do is not enough. Secondly, we're not even delivering on those promises. So we need to step up, but I believe finally at this COP26 at Glasgow, the most important one since COP21 that gave us the Paris Agreement, we finally see that countries are stepping up. They're delivering their enhanced action that the Paris Agreement tells each and every country that we have to deliver this year. And we also see, which is not least proven by the panel today, we also see that business is really stepping up and seeing not only the business imperative, but also, I believe, a moral imperative of being part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Right. So the idea here is to reflect on what the COP negotiations mean to different emission sectors, to different industries or target groups. And today we focus on the forest industries. The main question we have framed together is this: to what extent can we rely on renewable resources, such as the forest, to speed up the transition to a fossil-free future? A long way to frame a question. Any additional comments on how we've framed it? Just the question today?
I think we framed it wisely. I think it's important to understand that, first of all, no one or no sector or no one solution can be the whole issue solver here. So we are to look at how much the forest sector can deliver. And secondly, we need to remember, even though we're now focusing on COP26 and climate, we need to remember that we have 17 sustainable development goals that we've agreed upon. So we are also looking for the forest sector to make sure that what they contribute to reducing the climate impact also has co-benefits for the all other sustainability targets that we are reaching towards. And I know that if you do this wrong, it's not co-benefits, it's trade-offs. We want to make sure they don't happen. We want to make sure that forestry delivers as much emissions reductions and adaptation as possible with co-benefits.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for adding those comments on the main question. Now, I think we're both curious to hear the different reflections from our guests, and I would like to ask Viveka to join us, or to actually take the picture and the mic. And would you like to start by sharing your reflection on this overarching question today?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
The mic is yours.
Thank you. COP26 hasn't even started, and already voices are raised that it will all amount to nothing, that the negotiators will not be able to agree on measures that will stop or at least slow down the global heating. And reports being published on carbon emissions tally along the same line. But the thing is, like Mattias said, we can't really afford to fail. If we do, we rob our children of their future. So that option is not at hand. The question should rather be, how do we do it, not if we do it. What we need to sort out first is obviously which target to aim for. And I agree with what Mattias said, that this is not a single target. We have to make sure that we aim for a target which does not jeopardize other sustainability targets. But when it comes to COP26, I think the main focus area needs to be, how can we reduce our fossil carbon emissions? It sounds like I got off on a very negative start, but the thing is, I really do believe that it is possible to reduce fossil emissions, and I believe that the forest plays an instrumental role. In Sweden in particular, we have a unique opportunity given the fact that we have such a large area of sustainably managed forest lands. The growth forests sequestrate carbon, and the harvested wood can be turned into products we all need in our day-to-day lives. At least for me, it would be hard to live without toilet paper, sanitary products, or even milk cartons. And I'm glad that these needs can be met with products which are fossil-free. And just look at what we can build from wood. Today, we've even built a 20-story high building in wood. How cool isn't that? In the near future, I hope to be able to buy even more products made from wood in order to reduce my carbon footprint. But if we are to succeed, we need to address all the misconceptions which recently have been circulating around forestry. One of them is that it's better for the climate to refrain from cutting down trees. This is not true. As long as you plant new trees after harvesting, it's better for the climate to harvest rather than to leave the trees, both in the short run and in the long run. This is mainly because if we stop using wood, we will need to replace the products that were previously made from wood and make us even more dependent on fossil resources. Another misconception is that the whole tree is being burnt. That goes against everything Swedish Forestries believe in. Every centimetre of a tree that can be used for building is put to that use. And that's pure economics. So my message is really, really simple. If we replace products made from fossil materials with wood-based ones, we will be able to reduce our fossil emissions. But like Mattias and you, Jonas, said, there are concerned voices being raised when it comes to biodiversity. These concerns are valid, and given history, they need to be taken into account. 100 years ago, the state of the Swedish forest was terrible and generated a very low yield. Those forests were managed in what today would call continued cutting. We also didn't plant new trees, but relied on natural regeneration. In order to restore those forests, new forest management measures based on clear cutting was introduced as a method of preference. This increased the yield, but the flip side of the coin was that it had a diverse effect on several living species living in the forest. This wasn't done out of evilness, but because we didn't know better. And we need to learn from history. What we also need to acknowledge is that the clear cuttings in the 1980s that you often see in magazines and papers today are as different from today's clear cutting as an old Farsi typewriter is to the MacBook. The average clear cutting area in Sweden is below 5 hectares, and the larger clear cuttings are often attributed to bark beetles, storms, other calamities. This change method started in the 1990s, and since then the trend as regards biodiversity is developing in a positive direction, and it needs to continue to do so. Today, landowners, both private individuals and companies, take active measures to enhance biodiversity, setting aside areas and taking measures to increase the number of broadleaf trees and deadwood, which is good for biodiversity. But using wood from Swedish forest will not be enough. We really need to scale up. Around the globe, there are enormous areas which are not being harvested, in Canada and Russia, for instance. And just think of the potential if we increase the harvesting using sustainable forest management measures, and we're able to increase the number of fossil products we could replace by forest-based ones. That would be a momentous benefit to the climate. In doing so, the world can benefit from what we have learned in Sweden regarding how we can combine a high forest production with biodiversity. And I'm sure that we in Sweden can learn from other countries. That would be the way to make COP26 a true success, in my opinion. I'm confident that if we work together, we will be able to find new solutions and new uses for the wood fiber, as well as new methods for improving biodiversity. But like we said earlier, this is not a one-man show or even a one-industry show. We really need to work together to make sure that this conference of the parties is really a united effort. So I'm really eager to hear what the rest of you have to say on this topic today.
Thank you very much, Viveka, for sharing those reflections. So it's not a matter of if we can use the forest, but how we do that. And there's room for innovation and more efficient usage of the forest as a raw material to replace fossil materials in products, and that's the way forward, if I understand you correctly. Obviously, you mentioned the forestry methods and so forth, and there needs to be great care taken into learning from history, but doing that and improving those methods over time as well. Would that be a fair way to summarize your reflection?
A very good summary.
Okay, good. Now, I'd like to ask if anyone has a spontaneous or direct comment to Viveka's reflection here on how we can look at the forest as a hero, and could we bring Mattias in as well to listen in on? Who has a direct comment here? Ola, please.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I can just start with agreeing that we see the forest as a central part in sort of both mitigation, adaptation, and when it comes to finance, as Mattias said here. And I also agree with the Swedish Forest Industries here that in Sweden we see that, I mean, clearly the absolute majority of the trees that are harvested are not cut for energy. They are cut for other purposes, for sort of more high-end or high value products. But the situation can be different and is different in other parts of the world, and it's good to recognize that in some parts actually you cut trees for energy, and that's something you need to be clear about and sort of have that in the whole calculation when you look at the role of the forests. So I mean, from our perspective, biomass is it's a renewable resource, but also limited resource. So you should really use it where it makes the best purpose. And from a climate perspective, of course, that is in long-lived products. And if you use residues, waste for energy, it should be in sectors, to really be focused on sectors where there are no other alternatives available in the near future. Like you could say for aviation, for example, that it could be a good energy purpose. But when it comes to cars, I mean, it's a transition period now, but we really soon will have the electrical vehicles as a very good alternative, also on global scale. So I think that's some starting general remarks from our side.
Thank you for sharing. Mattias, a quick comment on Viveka's introductory, very quick.
I think it was wise, and I think a lot of the questions that we've had to the forest industry were addressed in a way that makes us all feel more confident that this can be a great sustainable way to reduce the climate impact that we have.
I'll actually move forward here to move to the area or the application for forest as a renewable source of energy to OK Q8 and Andréa Haag, and ask you to actually take the floor and share your reflection. You are the Director of Sustainability and Network at OK Q8, one of the major fuel companies in Sweden, and you've recently launched renewable petrol in your range. We are curious to know, what is your reflection on how much the forestry can actually take care of the climate efforts that we need to do. Are you ready to take the floor?
Sure. Well, I would like to start with saying that time is a factor here. As Viveka and also Jonas and Mattias stated beforehand, it's we're closing up to the COP26 now, and we have an urge to actually do something about the climate situation now. And yet investments, for instance, in trying to procure and also to develop biofuels, for instance, for the transport sector, actually has an investment horizon of 15 to 20 years. And this is, of course, a conflict. And as Ola also stated in his comment, we're looking at liquid biofuels or green fuels as a stepping stone towards an electrified car fleet in maybe some 20, 25 years from now. So we, of course, really look forward to having the possibility of offering more biofuels also produced from residual products from the forestry. But we also need to recognize that the investment climate for this product segment is somewhat challenged by time as a factor. We have in Sweden somewhere around 5 million personal vehicles today, and a lot of heavy-duty vehicles and other types of vehicles too. And the cars that go out on the streets today, they actually tend to stay there for some 18 years, increasingly longer actually, because it was 17 years just a few years ago. And this takes us all the way to 2040. And in this period from now to 2040, there will be a need for biofuels actually to support these drivelines that are not electrified or just partly electrified. And say as a stop, for instance, in 2030, we will need a couple of million liters of liquid biofuel. So, of course, we need to take all resources available to produce and source these biofuels in a responsible way. And there, I think that residual products from the forestry are key, actually, because there is not enough waste in other sectors to fulfill our need for liquid biofuels. So, looking at the careful forestry in many ways with, taking care of biodiversity and increase the resilience of the forests, looking into a number of factors. I think that if we could make use for biofuels during this intermediate period, that would be fantastic. Is my time running out? I can see you in the picture now.
Yes, but you'll have plenty more time to comment on other reflections as well, I think. So in summary, you're actually pointing out or adding the dimension of time here, that we are in a transition, and that time is a factor to be recognized, and that forests, from your perspective, is as a resource for renewable biofuels, but it's also a limited resource, of course, and it
absolutely should. And I think there are so many dimensions in, I don't know what you call it, some type of careful forestry, because there is a risk for exploitation also in the forestry sector, I guess, and we do not want those aspects into the fuel sector, of course.
Right. So, any comments from Viveka? Yes, please. Comment on Andréa's reflection here.
Yes, I think Andréa points to a very interesting dilemma, both in the short and in the long run, and that's the investments. I mean, in order to be able to make this transition, investments needs to be made, and if you are to, it will take some time before we are fully electrified, and during that transitional period, we need to have. I'm quite convinced that we need to have biofuels, because biofuels are better than non-biofuels, at least in the short run. But to get investors to invest on that technique, that could be a challenge. So I think perhaps we need to have a few incentives, and we also need to make sure that we know that we will be able to use the resources. I get a supply of wood, because otherwise that will also risk having a negative effect on investment.
Anna, thank you. Anna Ervast, Öberg, Folkhem. Do you have a comment on Andréa's reflection here with the investment perspective?
I think it's also interesting with the time perspective and how to find incentives in order to make these investments that is needed in order to get the most efficient way of getting these fuel, since I recognize it as a gap solution in a way. I mean, in the long run, maybe we need something else, but this is something but we still need to put a lot of effort and money within this innovation.
Great.
So
Ola, you
that's a
waved
challenge,
well.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was done.
Ola, you waved. So last comment before we move on. Oh, you're muted now. Sorry.
I clearly see the dilemma mentioned here. I think getting investments on board. So that's why I sort of said you maybe should focus the investments on the more long, where we see biofuels and bioenergy have a longer sort of value for several decades. And I think that's the tricky part with. I think it's great that OKQ8 now has the biopetrol, but it's a short-lived. It's going to be a short-lived product. I think talking about several decades, I think we will see the electrical personal vehicles here in a much shorter time frame than Andréa sort of foresees. But we'll see who, if I live, who is right.
Thank you. So. Running a bit short of time, I would like to actually move on to our third reflection. That's actually you, Ola, so thank you to the panel again. Reflecting a bit on, or taking this, there's obviously applications for the forests, but is there a limit to how much we can rely on biological ecosystems? And so you hear basically from the WWF Sweden, you're the senior advisor on energy and climate. Please, would you share your reflections on this gargantuous topic?
I would like maybe some time later on also reflect on your sort of your comparison to the World Cup, which I think is important, and I have some opposition there maybe. But I'll focus now on the biomass and the forest and forest industry part here in the COP26. And I think for us, we clearly see as the forests have a big role, and what we're pushing for in the UN negotiations and also now for the COP26 is the role of nature, to recognize the important role of nature when it comes to climate, and also sort of focusing on getting the solutions where we have a win-win aspect on both climate and biodiversity. For us, as Mattias mentioned there earlier on, all the SDGs are important, and the sustainable development goals of the world. And for us, the biodiversity is equal important to climate. We have a accelerating loss of nature in the world, and this curve also has to be bent in the right direction, as we have with the climate crisis. So we need to solve these two these crises at the same time. So, and their forests, of course, can play a critical role, both as set-asides, I mean, saving forests where you have a valuable nature, but also, of course, we see the forest industry has a role in harvesting and creating long-lived products that sort of can sequester the carbon and, you could say, store it and take it away from the atmosphere. So clearly, the forest has an important role. I think when it comes to impact on the forest industry, the COP26 and the research on that level has a minor impact compared to the European ambitions in different ways to have the forest contribute to the climate. So I think the EU packages now, for example, the Fit for 55 packages and other initiatives that are sort of pushing for more sustainable and climate friendly industry, but also ways for the forest to store more carbon, will have a much larger impact on the forest industry in Sweden. I can stop there in sake of time.
Basically, you're bringing in the biodiversity topic as an equally important target to the climate targets, and shedding some light on the EU perspective on how to move forward with this. And you also say that you don't see that the COP negotiations this year will have such a big impact on the European way of moving forward with forestry, but rather perhaps globally.
Or maybe, I mean, the European efforts up till the COP. I mean, it's the new climate plan from EU that sort of has pushed these initiatives on the forest that we see in the EU. And I think in the long run, we will have a forest industry, but the amount of wood, at least for a time period, that you can harvest will not increase. It would most likely be lower, especially if you want to look on the biodiversity sides and have that aspect sort of safeguarded.
Okay, can we bring the panel back and listen to a few comments here? Yes, so let's start with you, Anna Ervast Öberg from Folkhem.
Yeah, I also want to, since you addressed the issue that the nature now takes part in the discussion regarding the solution of this climate crisis, I would address we know that we are in this climate crisis, but we also know that if we continue as we does now, we will also be in the middle of a resource crisis. I mean, we have only one like renewable raw material, and that's the forest, basically. Like all other materials we have on this planet is going to end if we continue like this. So the question is also like, how is the effect and what does it cost if we not use the forest in as many ways as we can? That was my comment. Yeah.
Viveka, would you like to comment on this fact that there are actually a double target to meet, and on Ola's remark that the yield of the forests are likely to not increase, but to be kept at a continuous level rather than increase. What's your take on that?
I think that depends on the perspective that you have. I definitely agree with Ola that it's very, you can't just focus on one target. You need to take both climate, the global heating and biodiversity and equality, wealth generation, all that you need to take into account. And I also share his picture of the future that at least in the Nordic countries, or perhaps in Europe, the harvested area will not increase, rather continue as is. That's at least my perspective. But I think this is a conference of the parties. It's not a conference of the European parties. So we need to think globally. And I am convinced that we need to work on reforestation, definitely. But I also think that there are areas which can be used for harvesting, like I said initially. But what I do hope is that we can learn from past mistakes and sort of, if we could have a global brain when it comes to forestry, that would be beneficial, because we have learned things when harvesting historically in methods perhaps not used in other countries. So I think it is possible to increase the number of wood products, but not in Europe necessarily. In Europe, I think we have to focus on using each segment of the tree for the right purpose.
And you think that what we know about forestry in the Nordic regions could be used to facilitate more sustainable forest in globally. So there's two angles of the same issue there. Moving on and actually asking Anna Ervast Öberg from Folkhem to share with us your reflection. You are the head of business and product development at construction company Folkhem, and you are actually company who specializes in high-rise buildings in wood, and have recently launched a number of projects around this. What are your reflections on this topic of how forests can actually play a role in achieving the Paris agreements? And to what extent can we rely on forests? Please, will you share your reflection?
Thank you very much. We have a very specific angle on this question, And since we are operating in this industry, construction and real estate development industry, which is very emission heavy, we see that we have a huge responsibility of making to point out a direction where we can make the most change. And we know that shifting from raw material like concrete and steel towards timber, we can like cut the footprints of everything that we actually built by at least half. And then we also can add the aspect of within our future cities and construction, we can also create a fantastic storage of carbon. And we know that we have a knowledge about the technical possibilities, and we have an understanding of the huge impact of using timber within our constructions. So actually, our company Folkhem made a decision already 2012 to only work with this question and to develop a portfolio of housing projects that is going to be built only in timber, and to show that this is the way that we have to build our future cities. So, I mean, as we all said here, it's not a one party that can be a part of the solution. It's a very complex question, and the construction company is very what do you say? It's a clear image of all these many parties and a need for collaboration. So in order for us to point out the direction, we have a possibility to also affect a lot of other parties within this industry.
Thank you very much, Anna Ervast Öberg from Folkhem, sharing this reflection, and from a sector which is also part of, obviously, one of the emission sectors, the construction industry, which is often recognized as one of the major emission sectors. And you say that you have a strategic decision from 2012 to use wood to a greater extent, thereby cutting your emissions in half when building these houses or these buildings, constructing them. Obviously, there's another story around how the houses or the buildings actually live and how they affect what the footprint of when they are erected. To what extent do you see that the customers, the tenants of your houses, actually enjoy or appreciate the lower carbon footprint that they actually live in?
It's an interesting question. So we have been working within the industry with a raising of the level of knowledge around the possibilities. And what we're doing now is we have a project within the inner city of Stockholm, which has a very high symbolic value because we put it on it's a commercial project. We put it on the market with a lot of competition. And we see that when we work with communication towards our customers, there is a high level of, people are so, they appreciate very much to know that they are being part of a bigger impact than just collecting garbage in specific containers. So, this is, it's all about pushing a shift within a very conservative industry.
Of course. Andréa, would you unmute yourself and comment as well, please?
Yes, I'm just a bit curious about costs, because I think as much as time is a factor, I think that cost is a factor. We see it with biofuels in our sector, and that a slightly higher cost at the pump actually reverts people from choosing that fuel. And I imagine it could be some of the same character in your sector as well, because I guess that you have established raw materials and then you have the new coming in. And I guess there is a discrepancy between the both.
please comment, Anna, and then Ola should comment.
There has happened so much like the last 5 years within this area. And I would say now when we calculate on our projects, it's cost neutral now, but we also see a big, we're not very secure of what happens with the cement industry, for example, in Sweden. So there are so many factors around us that sort of points towards what I addressed before, like this resource crisis that will also affect the cost, but in our favor, I guess.
Ola, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think more on the same matter, but just that's where policymakers, governments have a big role in sort of implementing policies and measures that make sort of what we don't want to see more expensive and the sort of the more climate friendly products cheaper. So I think we need several, not only cost, but there are other policies and measures as well. But I think that's the area we need help.
Good. Viveka, do you have a comment here? Since this is perhaps the as you refer to the best way to use the forests in a very constructive application.
Yes, I mean, this is the reason we grow trees in Sweden, to be able to build houses. And I'm fully convinced that building in wood is the foremost or the most important tool in order to mitigate climate change. So yes, but unfortunately we can't use the entire tree, so we use it for other purposes as well. But you can't use parts of the tree. You need to use the entire tree. But building in wood is definitely something that everybody seems to be able to agree upon.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for sharing your reflections on this very broad question, but important one. I'd like to then bring all these reflections back to you, Mattias, in your very wooden cottage in Thailand, yes, in the rainforests of Thailand. So symbolic. To ask you for your main assignment in this show, to actually comment on the reflections or reflect on the reflections. What have you heard here today that gives you takeaways and hope for?
Well, first of all, I think this is exactly what's needed in the weeks leading up to the COP26. Concrete examples of how we can move from unsustainable and fossil-based to much more sustainable and renewable. And also, I think the link between the different examples we've seen here is very clear. When Folkhem builds their houses, I imagine that you use square planks and a tree is roughly round. So in between the round and the square, there will clearly be leftovers that are great to be used as renewable fuels to replace the fossil petrol and diesel, which is such a great contributor to climate change. And very often we start realizing, and I want to thank WWF for that, we start to realize that we must not only reach climate neutrality, we must also get rid of some of the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. That can be done with direct air capture, carbon capture and storage, or other modern technologies. But when I look at them, I struggle to see how they help biodiversity. I struggle to see how they help the poorest around the world, or how they help to combat hunger, or to reach the 17 sustainable development goals that we agreed upon. But when we do it by focusing on the bioeconomy, by doing more in wood, by using the forestry more wisely, by combining afforestation, which gives us more trees, and then being able to use more trees, then we get all the positive side benefits and the co-benefits and reaching the sustainable development goals that we need to. Because the trees that we plant, they suck up carbon from the atmosphere. When we use those trees for buildings and the leftovers for fuels, we store the carbon and we replace the fossil fuels. Now, what we need to do, and I think that's actually going to happen at the COP, we need to start doing much more, as Ola mentioned, to get rid of the incredibly big subsidies that are still there for the fossil fuel economy. And we need to know, much as much as these are great big companies and actors that we've seen around the table today, the biggest actors, the biggest lobbyists, and the biggest money is still with the fossil fuel sector. And that's why seeing such positive examples is so great. And I want to reach out and thank you at the Bridge for helping us to share them with the world, because moving forward, we see the common enemy out there, which is the fossil fuel-based economy that we need to replace quickly.
So any specific, if we look to the COP26 and look forward, I'm going to ask every one of you for your tip on what to follow during the Glasgow weeks. But Mattias, you are onto something here to actually look for how the subsidies on fossil fuels or fossil industries or fossil materials, how they can be lifted or abolished. Where will this happen in the negotiations in Glasgow?
Well, part of it might happen in the actual negotiations, but I often like to look just a little bit to the side of the negotiations, because as you know, the COP, Conference of the Parties, is a UN-based system, which means that each and every country has to agree. And that's why it's moving at what used to be glacial speed, but unfortunately the glaciers are moving faster nowadays. So it's often more creative and more pragmatic to look at when you get 20, 50, 70 countries together forming coalitions of the willing. We already saw that the other week with methane gas, a coalition to reduce those in the near future, Sweden being one of the countries to join early. I'm convinced we'll see something on phasing out coal. And I believe that the coalition that's already there, Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform, will grow at Glasgow. But also when we look at how each and every country has to deliver their enhanced action, what they want to do more than previously on mitigation and adaptation, I'm convinced that the bioeconomy and trees and forestry are going to have a large role.
Thank you. Ola, would you like to comment here?
No, I just wanted to chip in sort of my tips, want to look on. I think, and I can come back to this World Cup comparison you did. I think
excellent.
The actual UN negotiations, the COP26, is not sort of the playoffs and finals of the World Cup. It's sort of the meeting where you plan the rules for the tournament. So it's kind of boring. It's technical, boring in that way. I mean, the finals and the playoffs, it's all the pledges where the countries sort of say what we're going to do and also what they actually achieve. I think that's the game, and that's where you have the winners and the finals. And I think what we look on, and ambition is something then more to look on the sides. Ahead of this COP, there's something we all pushed for, that all countries should deliver their plans on their ambition. And I think still we're waiting on China's plan, in this case, the so-called National Determined Contribution, or NDC. What will they deliver? They have made some statements, but what will they actually send a plan to the UN? I think that's important. And then, of course, to get the rule book, I mean, that's all the technical details, to get that in place so you can start working with the Paris Agreement.
Excellent.
But for us, ambition is the most important part.
So your tip is to keep your eyes on the China NDCs and how they're delivered. What happens with them? Yeah.
And if we get, and I think in negotiations we will know, will we get the rule book or not? And I think it's not true. We will not die if we don't get it, but of course that would be a really good signal on the way forward if we can close the rule book and start working with it.
Great. Andréa, you were waving. Do you have a tip for what to follow during the COP negotiations?
Yeah, I just agree with Mattias and Ola, of course, having this overall perspectives, which is crucial for going ahead onwards. But also the switch to electric vehicles and renewable fuels and renewables at all as a part of the second week of the negotiations. I think that will be very interesting, also from a global perspective. So I will follow that closely.
Good. Great tips. Anna Ervast, Öberg, what do you keep your eyes on during the Glasgow days? Oh, you're on mute now. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, I'm very interested in this question of the finance regulations moving ahead and how to steer the flow of money from fossil-based economy toward, but nothing more like specific than that. So
are you talking about the $100 billion estimated to be the annual budget for climate work that has been up for debate or follow up during the pre-COP in Milano, and now will be obviously. You're talking about those,
but also the tools, like the regulations, what the game plan, sort of.
So the budget and the game plan for using it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Viveka, Beckeman, Swedish Forest Industries. You've heard many different reflections on how the forests can actually be a vital or critical part of the Paris, or be in fulfilling the Paris Agreement. What will be your best tips to follow during the COP26 in Glasgow?
It's hard to say something new because so many good things have already been said, but I would agree with Andréa the second week when they will be talking about renewables. I mean, we need to make, I really hope that all the parties coming to COP26 will be willing to make real concrete commitments to contribute further to bioeconomy. I mean, we need to phase out the fossil, and the tools to be used has to come into focus, like financing, for instance. We need to speed up the use of renewables.
So you will be looking for the accelerator, basically, and to see where that can be applied during the days in Glasgow. Excellent. And Mattias, unmute yourself and last comment, please.
I think that often when we try to understand the COP negotiations, they seem very technical and very far away, and it's hard to get a grasp of what the agreements really mean. And also it's hard to understand why it takes so damn long to reach those agreements. But the most important thing that I believe that we all can do, us six here in the panel, but also everyone watching, is to be a leading example. I'm so excited that Sweden, with 7 parties out of 8 in the parliament, have decided that we're going to be the world's first fossil-free economy with climate neutrality 2045, that the EU has decided climate neutral world's first region 2050, that the US has decided to be climate neutral 2050, China 2060. It might not be the World Cup that you mentioned, Jonas, but it certainly is becoming now a fight for leadership in combating climate change. And that fight for leadership always starts somewhere. It starts with somebody at a construction company or building company or housing company like Folkhem saying we should build in wood. It starts like somebody saying, well, we should sell something better than petrol at our fueling stations. Can we make it from the leftovers when those houses are built in wood? It starts by an NGO on the environmental side saying, let's have a constructive approach here and see how we can together develop better. It starts by humans. And some of these people around the virtual table now I know from before. All great people, but also, in all honesty, all normal people, which means that if we can be the example that can inspire others, so can the rest of us. And there is nothing more important in these times of urgency than to show that the way forward is not only possible, it's also positive. It's something that we want to do.
I think that's a great note to end on, a positive note to end on. Thank you so much. I've heard and learned that forests really are a hero to address the climate change, and there are multiple ways to actually do this in sustainable ways. Time is a factor, and we need to reflect on that. And it might not be, the COP negotiations might not be the World Cup that we would have wanted it to be, but it will perhaps set the rules for how to play it once it's time. Thank you so much for your tips and on what to look out for. Thank you for joining us today. Anna Ervast, Öberg, Folkhem, Ola Hansen, WWF Sweden, Andréa Haag, OK Q8, and Viveka Beckeman, Swedish Forest Industry, and Mattias Goldmann, of course, for joining us today. We will be back. We will be back on October 21st with our next episode of Bridge Talks to COP26, this time hosted by construction giant Skanska. Look forward and make sure to tune into that. And all the details you will find at thebridge.se. Thebridge.se. That is all for now today, and thank you all for joining us.